Mike Brown, the former FEMA director.
Joining us here is the former FEMA director.
History, I think, was very unkind to you, my friend. Very unkind.
Mr. Brown, thanks for being with us.
This is Michael Brown Unplugged.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Michael Brown Unplugged. I'm really glad to have you with me. So, because of this stupid United Nations climate change, they had the UN General Assembly, and along with it, they had their climate change week. And the sound bites just continue to pour in, and I continue to be amazed by the utter dumbassery of, it's like we're going in two entirely different directions. On the radio program I think it was on Monday, I described how Canada had actually taken observable historical data of temperatures in Canada, and when they were going to put the new information into their computer models, they took out all of that historical data. Now, that historical data was actually observed data, meaning that it was, they had temperatures somewhere. They actually recorded temperatures in different parts of the provinces. But that wasn't good enough. So they threw all of that out and instead decided from 1950 to 2005, they would just come up with what they thought. I mean, it's like me sitting here in my home studio and thinking, okay, so I want to design a computer model to show specifically that the Earth is warming, or that the Earth is cooling, or that we're all going to die from whatever it might be. So I just pick a time period. Oh, I've got all this observable data from the 1800s up to 1950, but if I plug that data in, it's not going to fit with what I want my ultimate outcome to be. So I'm going to discard all of that observable data, and instead I'm going to put in data that I've just made out of whole cloth. I pulled it out of my butt and decided that this is the data I'm going to put in from 1950 to 2005. So I plugged that into my computer model. It does its little thing. The chips do all of their little magic, and then it spits out, and holy cow, why look, we're facing global warming. Just like in the 1970s, where we're facing global cooling, and it's going to continue to do everything else. But we've now reached a new level of stupidity. And the new level of stupidity is, and I know that I've played the soundbite before of the little girl in 1992 talking about her fear of climate change, although I think then it was global cooling or something. I can't keep up with it. Now I've got this soundbite of Senator Kamala Harris, who is running to be the President of the United States of America, who is heard comforting what she claims is an abused child about dying from global warming. It is infuriating and sad at the same time.
I was scared every day. So here's the thing. You're right to feel that way, but you also have to remember that we're all in this together, okay? And you always have to remember that you're not alone. Do you hear me? You always have to remember that, okay? I just don't want to die. No, baby.
I just right there. Now I know this is kind of this is one of those audio bites where somebody with a phone sees an encounter and they start recording it. The little girl talks about how frightened she is because of climate change. I mean, you can hear the fear in her voice. And Kamala Harris says to her, "Well, you have to remember, we're all in this together, sweetheart." She doesn't offer any solutions, but that we're all in this together. So don't be afraid, because I guess there's power in numbers. So if there are enough useful idiots in the world, don't worry about dying, because we're all useful idiots, and so we'll all die together. And then the little girl actually says that she is fearful of dying.
You don't want to die from this. No, baby, you're not.
I don't want to die from this. No, baby, you're not.
You're not. And we're going to be smart, and we're going to fight and win. We are going to win, and we're going to take on the people who are just failing to have courage. Okay?
We're going to win. We're going to have the courage, and we're going to take on the people who are just afraid of us winning. Is this really a battle about winning or losing? Or is this a battle for the truth? I know this irritates me to no end because I don't think that climate change is anything about a battle for winning or losing. Now, I know that some may say that in terms of public policy, it is, and I might grant you that. But at the heart of this matter is the truth. And the truth is this. The data is being manipulated. The climate has always changed. It always will. It changes because of so many things that are way beyond our control. Sunspots, just solar flares, the effect of the sun, the effect of the solar system, moisture, water vapor in the air, volcanoes, everything that we have no control over has so much greater effect on the climate than our stupid little SUVs or fracking or anything else. I think the truth is beginning to win out. Maybe I'm naive, but I truly believe that it is. The truth has a way of, and you may not feel like on any given day that we're winning this battle. See there, I use the narrative winning versus losing. But I think we are winning the battle of truth versus deception. And I think that many people fall in the same category that I do. I sincerely believe that the climate is changing. I've watched the climate change in Colorado. I have lived in this state long enough, 30-some plus years, that I know that the climate that we're beginning to see now, that everybody seems so concerned about, or that it's evidence of climate cooling or climate warming or whatever it is the climate that I remember from my early days in Colorado. When I listen to my mom, who has lived in the same part of Oklahoma for her entire 87 years, she talks about, this is kind of reminds me of this, or kind of reminds me of that. And we went through this period and went through that period. And we've gone through droughts and we've gone through rainy seasons. And, there are times when with the wildflowers out on the prairie have been absolutely gorgeous, blooming. And then there's times when it's just dusty and dirty and nasty. They've lived through the Dust Bowl. She's lived through all of that stuff. But I think that's where most people are. I think most people admit and believe, because I'm not a climate denier. I'm not going to sit here and say the climate doesn't change. I'd be a fool to do that. But here's what I don't believe. I don't believe that this little speck of humanity on Earth there may be some de minimis impact, but that de minimis impact that human beings have on the climate by farting, by growing crops, by raising cattle, by doing whatever the hell is that we do, is so infinitesimal in its impact compared to those things that we cannot control, that if we were to adopt the kinds of policies that these Marxists want us to adopt so that they can control how we live, where we live, what we eat, what we do, how we transport ourselves, all of the things that they want control over, if they were to gain that control, they would have done what? They would have had little, if any, impact on the climate, but they would have fundamentally transformed this constitutional republic into some sort of statist, centrally planned economy, i.e. a Marxist state or a communist state. And I have reached the conclusion that that is precisely what they want. And climate change is simply a vehicle to get us there. And now we're abusing children. We have children who have tears in their eyes because they have been taught to fear that they, in their young little life of 12 years old, that they'll never make it to 20. They'll never make it to 30. Shame on us. Shame on us. I'll be right back. As I've said many times in the past, I really get irritated with the idea of referring to any particular judge or justice as this is a Reagan-appointed judge, or this is a Clinton-appointed judge, or a Bush or an Obama-appointed judge, because I don't think that should make any difference. I think judges, and I know that, look, I'm trying to be realistic at the same time that I'm trying to point out the way things should be. And in this case, the judiciary is not a political arm of our government. The judiciary is designed quite simply to interpret the laws that are passed by Congress or administered by the executive branch. That's what they do. That's what the Article III courts are about, interpreting the Constitution, interpreting the constitutionality of rules, policies, regulations, statutes that state, local, federal governments, adopt, or on the constitutionality of certain processes or procedures involving criminal law. I mean, that's the whole point of the court. And there should not be a litmus test other than, well, this really isn't a litmus test, because a litmus test implies that you have a certain political view. I believe the test for anybody, for any judicial position is, are you going to objectively interpret the law based upon the Constitution of the United States, the Constitution of your state, and are you going to guarantee that you're going to do that objectively based on the plain meaning of the constitutions? Pretty simple. Bernie Sanders apparently thinks otherwise.
And my promise to you this evening is that I will never nominate anybody to the U.S. Supreme Court who is not 100% pro-choice.
100% pro-choice. So I guess this is how the interview goes with a President Bernie Sanders. Ooh, let that sink in for a minute. President Bernie Sanders. I know it's not going to happen. So Bernie, here's what I like about Bernie's campaign. This is a tangent. So everybody who knows me knows when I go off on a tangent, I'll get back to my point. My tangent here is Bernie Sanders is actually serving a useful purpose. He and Elizabeth Warren are splitting the socialist vote, the useful idiot vote, among themselves. Bernie Sanders is not going to get the nomination. But Bernie Sanders can direct, because of the number of delegates that he get between now and the Democrat nomination, he may be able to steer that Democrat platform and steer the ultimate nominee to stay as far to the left as possible, as politically possible. And that's a good thing for us. Because I think the starker distinction between those Marxists running on the left versus Donald Trump, assuming that he's the nominee, is better for us in the long run. But when it gets down to the convention and Bernie knows that he's not going to win, those delegates are going to go probably to Elizabeth Warren, which is going to help her win the nomination. I still believe that Elizabeth Warren ultimately wins the nomination. Now, that's going out on a limb because we're not quite there yet, and we won't be there for a while. But back to Bernie Sanders. So here's how I imagine a Bernie Sanders presidency goes when he's interviewing someone or a group of people to be nominees to the United States Supreme Court or to the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals or whatever it may be. So tell me, Judge Andy, what's your position on abortion? Well, the right judge is going to say, I have a personal opinion about abortion, but that's not going to interfere with my interpretation of any abortion cases that come before us. Well, now this is Bernie Sanders. Well, potential nominee, tell me your personal position on abortion. Well, I think I'm opposed to abortion personally. Okay, you're out of here. Next nominee. So tell me, potential nominee, What's your position on abortion? Well, I'm 100% for it. I think it's a woman's choice. Doesn't make any difference to me what the laws or the statutes are, what the Constitution says. I don't care that Roe v. Wade may have been decided on irregular grounds, improper grounds, or whatever else. I am 100% pro-abortion. Okay, I don't care about anything else you say. You get the nomination. Listen again.
And my promise to you this evening is that I will never nominate anybody to the U.S. Supreme Court who is not 100% pro-choice.
100% pro-choice. A litmus test. Well, good for you, Bernie. Have at it. Just have at it. You know that Rashida Tlaib is she's a Democrat from Michigan. She's a Muslim woman. She's part of that stupid group of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Rashida Tlaib, and Ilhan Omar. And I think there's a fourth one, but I can't remember who the fourth one is. It'll come to me in a minute. Well, anyway, the House Ethics Committee on Monday announced that it's extending a review of Congressman Tlaib over accepting a salary from her 2018 campaign before taking office. This announcement was the first time the committee has publicly acknowledged that the progressive freshman lawmaker is actually under some ethics scrutiny. House Ethics Committee Chairman Ted Deutsch, a Democrat from Florida, and the panel's ranking Republican, Kenny Marchant from Texas, issued a joint statement that the probe does not itself indicate that any violation has occurred, of course they've got to say that, or reflect any judgment on behalf of the committee. Now, they're going to announce their next course of action, such as potentially opening a formal investigation by November 14. But what is it about this group of women, and apparently their continued violation of campaign finance laws as if they don't apply to them? Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had to fire her chief of staff for campaign finance violations. Rashida Tlaib is under questions about this. Ilhan Omar is under questions about this. You want my theory? Well, you're going to get my theory regardless. My theory is this is how socialists think. Socialists believe that they know better than anybody else what's good for you, and that the rules apply to all the plebes, all of you, but the rules don't apply to them. This is how socialism eventually morphs into communism, and it morphs into statism and in a dictatorship, because somebody has to make the rules. In a constitutional republic like us, we the people are the ultimate decision makers. We get to decide. But do you think the people of Russia get to decide? I mean, I know they've got their Duma. I know they've got their so-called legislative group, and I know they've got their so-called court system. But who really makes the rules in Russia? Putin does. Vladimir Putin decides that this is going to be what the Duma is going to do. The Duma simply rubber stamps what Putin, just like a mobster, a mob boss, just like he tells his minions, this is what I want done. There's never any blowback to the mob boss. They just make it look like, yep, well, I'm just doing this, and everybody knows they're doing it on behalf of the mob boss. This is how socialists work, and this is why socialism ultimately morphs into communism and some sort of dictatorship. Because these women, behaving the way they do, tell me that psychologically they don't believe that the rules apply to them. And in fact, my guess is if you could get them on the psychiatrist's couch and talk about, well, why do you do these things? Well, I think the rules are wrong. I don't think the rules are fair. I don't think this or that. And so I'm just going to do what I want to do because, well, I'm a United States congressman and I can do whatever I want to do. Well, what about the rest of us that have to comply with all sorts of financial rules? We have to comply with Securities and Exchange Commission rules. We have certain fiduciary responsibilities. We have IRS responsibilities and rules and procedures that we have to comply with. But they don't think that. They don't think that because they believe they know best. I've talked about the whole concept of there truly is this deep beltway, that there is this disease that people get when they move into the beltway. And I think this is an example of that. in their other lives, they, look, I don't think necessarily I'm a rule breaker, although I've been known to break the rules when necessary. But I am, as my entire family and all my friends know, I push the envelope. I push the envelope as close to the edge as I possibly can, particularly when I'm doing something that I think is right. But I don't impose that on somebody else. It's me doing it. They want to impose their idea on everybody else. And once they get that little pin that says they're a member of Congress, that little pin gives them so many perks. People genuflect to them all the time. And so they get this feeling of empowerment and they don't have to follow the rules. Now, do I think anything will come of this ethics inquiry? No, nothing ever does. I shouldn't say that. The House Ethics Committee in the past has taken action against some members, so I'll reserve judgment. But because she's female, Muslim, Democrat, I'm not going to hold my breath. Be right back. I have said oftentimes that I don't want to talk about the same thing on the Michael Brown Unplugged podcast that I talk about on the radio program. But I'm going to make an exception today because on Tuesday I talked about this for a bit only because of a tweet that I saw. If you didn't hear the radio program, I talked about how a Chinese law enforcement officer in Hong Kong shot a protester with a handgun, point blank. And it's hard to tell from the video whether the protester, I'm sure the cop was, scared, and rightfully so, should be scared. The cop had his weapon drawn. The protester, I've seen two angles of the video, and it appears that the protester may have been moving toward the law enforcement officer, the cop, who's in complete riot gear. So other than just fearful of, being shoved to the ground or something, I'm not quite sure what the cop was scared of. Because, well, as in totalitarian governments, the people are unarmed and law enforcement is armed. So somebody that I don't even know the person, but somebody I knew had retweeted the video, and I watched the video, and then I looked for different angles, and as I said, I found two different angles. But what intrigued me and saddened me and infuriated me were the comments to the video. And the comments, generally speaking, were like this. Well, anytime you attack a cop, you should expect to be shot. And generally, I agree with that statement. Because if you're a thug in this country, now if you're a thug in this country, let me make perfectly clear, I'm talking about a thug in the United States of America. If you lunge at a cop with a knife, if you refuse to put a gun down, if you're Michael Brown from Ferguson, Missouri, and not from Denver, Colorado, because I'm still alive, and you refuse to follow orders and you actually lunge at a cop or try to take a cop's gun away, you're likely to end up in one of my taxpayer relief shots, and we are going to celebrate the fact that a cop was able to defend himself. But here's the difference that nobody wants to talk about. I'm so riled up about this. What are these protesters doing in Hong Kong? That's a pregnant pause. I want you to think about what the protesters are doing. They are fighting for freedom and liberty. They are pushing against a totalitarian government that wants to, among other things, it's expanded, but at the very beginning, it was in opposition to an extradition law that would allow somebody charged with any crime, or perhaps no crime, in the Hong Kong province, or in this city-state, whatever they call it, to be extradited to mainland China, where they would probably be stuck in a re-education camp, a concentration camp, put to death, some sort of, trial. They're fighting for freedom. I always questioned, back in the 90s when the United Kingdom turned over Hong Kong to be governed by China. I thought it was a huge mistake. And I thought at some point, I didn't know when, but I thought at some point Hong Kongers would stand up and resist because China would naturally want to start taking more and more control over Hong Kong. And that's what we are witnessing. We are witnessing the communists take over what is a thriving free market society that they have no control over. So using their proxies in the Hong Kong government, they start with an extradition law. We know how we can keep those who want liberty and freedom. We know how we can keep them under control. Let's pass an extradition law so that if you get a parking ticket or you're charged with some sort of misdemeanor in their judicial system, we can bring them to the mainland where they will disappear and never be heard from again. Accomplishes two things. One, it shuts up and silences that particular lawbreaker that I'm using air quotes around. It allows us to, if someone protests, to extradite them and shut them up. And the second thing that it does is it silences and scares those who might otherwise have a burning desire in their heart and soul for freedom, but are scared to stand up. That's why I have from a distance so greatly admired not only those in Venezuela who've tried to stand up to Maduro, but in particular those Hong Kongers who have taken to the streets in peaceful protests, trying to stop the imposition of communism in their country, in their city-state. And so now they've reached that boiling point because the Chinese government has sent in armed law enforcement, armed military, whatever they might be. You see, you can't tell. You can't tell what they are. And so now they're trying to silence these people, and now one of them has actually been shot. There is a huge difference between those who want to stand up and fight for freedom and take that battle for freedom and liberty to the streets with violence. That's the nature of our nation. Our nation was found in a violent revolution by a very small group of patriots who said we refuse to live under tyranny. We refuse to live under the dictates of King George, and so we declare our independence and we say to the world, here are, please go read the Declaration of Independence. Here are our complaints. Here is why we are doing what we are doing. We are declaring our independence from this government that refuses to allow us to live in freedom and liberty and self-governance. And then we took up arms. We took up arms, and a small group of patriots, representing probably less than 10% of the population in the colonies, defeated the greatest, strongest army in the world at the time. We're seeing something similar play out in Hong Kong. And yet here are Americans on this stupid Twitter platform talking about, well, that's what happens when you go up against cops. Totally ignoring the incredible black and white distinction between what they're doing and what the purpose of those riots are versus riots in wherever, Watts or Dallas or New York or Newark or wherever riots may occur because somebody feels aggrieved because a cop shot somebody, and as you may hear in the very near future, a cop in Dallas was found guilty of murder. And so now, who knows what's going to happen. That's a different kind of riot. That's not a riot for liberty and freedom. That's not pushing back against tyranny. And I find it incredibly sad, frustrating, and disheartening that people see this kid, this protester being shot, and the response is, well, you go up against a cop, you're going to get killed. It's so much more than that. I don't know where these Hong Kong protests are going to lead to. I don't know what's going to happen. But I do know this. I do know they're fighting against tyranny. And we should honor and recognize that and not dismiss it as some sort of riot in a street because, well, we're bored and so let's go break into a bunch of convenience stores and let's break windows because we're all pissed off and we feel some sort of victimhood about something. No, these riots are because they're fighting for liberty and freedom. And I'm not advocating that we should intervene that this country should intervene, but we should at least give them moral support. And we should recognize it for what it is. It's not just a cop shooting a protest. It very well could be another shot heard round the world. Unfortunately, they're fighting a communist regime that is hell-bent on keeping Hong Kong from remaining a free and quasi-independent state. Keep your eye on it. Thanks for listening to this episode. I greatly appreciate it. You know the drill. Subscribe on iHeart, subscribe in iTunes, and then I have a favor to ask. Don't quit listening. Don't stop the podcast yet. The favor I have is please share it with your friends. Share it on Facebook, Twitter. Talk about it. Tell your friends about it. Tell them to go subscribe to Michael Brown Unplugged. Greatly appreciate it. I'll talk to you tomorrow.